Well, I just want to echo quickly what Charlie said about Rooted. If you haven't been through Rooted, man, definitely check that out, whether you're new to church or not even a believer or follower of Jesus yet, or you've been grown up in church, you've been a follower of Jesus for decades. It is a great environment. It's a great experience. You will not regret it. We have a group that's going to be meeting on Wednesday nights at 6:30 right here in Eagle, and we would love to have you be a part of it. You can just go to the Church Center app and find out all the information that you need about that. So endings matter. Like, have you ever been watching a really good movie, but then it just sort of crash lands at the end of the movie, and it just like ruins the whole thing, and you're just like, that's it. Like, it was like a super interesting story. There's this mystery, and then it's just like, it was aliens, and it's just like, and that was the end. And you're just like, it's aliens again? Isn't it always aliens? Like, everything that can't be explained, it's always aliens. But that happens a lot with TV shows, right? Like, even the great ones, where they don't know how to end it. They get to the final series, they get to the final season, and they're trying to figure out how to bring it to a close, and it's always a letdown, right? Everybody who's ever loved any TV show, it gets to the end, they hate the final season, or they hate the final episodes, and it's terrible. And it happens in sports too, right? Whether you're watching gymnastics and there's somebody on the parallel bars or somebody on the uneven bars, and they'll have a great performance, and often the difference between the winners and the losers comes down to the ending, right? It comes down to the person who can stick the landing. And so I was thinking about all that this week because today is the final week of our 8-week series that we've been in on primal questions. And this is the longest series we've ever done. And so we've been talking about this series, and I have no idea if we're going to be able to stick the landing on this series or not, but we're going to give it a shot, and I think we're going to find out together how it all goes, and we'll just see what happens. But what I can tell you this morning is that I'm actually preaching to myself today. Like that happens a lot because often the things that I come and I teach and I share and I speak about with you are really things that have just been processing in my own life and my own heart. But today, this happens to be my primal question. And so there's a lot that I have to say about this. There's a lot that I have experienced around this. So I'm just going to preach to myself, and you're invited to listen in and see if anything helps you out. So when you have kids, if you have kids, you've probably had this experience. It's always interesting to see their different personalities. And one of the places that the difference in the way that your kids are wired sort of shines through it comes in when it's time to do chores, right? Like no kid loves chores, but sometimes, and maybe you don't have any of these kids. Maybe your kids are all the same, but we have 4 different kids, and they all interact very differently when it comes to chores. But sometimes you have kids where, like, even though they don't like them, they don't want to do them, they get it. Like they just sort of accept it. They accept their fate. That they're not going to fight back. They're just going to do it. It's just a part of life that you just got to do it. You got to do your chores. But then there are the others. There are those that complain and whine, and they quit in the middle, and they demand an explanation of why it matters before they can continue. They're going, it doesn't even make sense to make my bed. It doesn't matter. I'm getting back in it tonight. No one's going to see it. Nobody's going to come in my room. Nobody cares. It's not hurting anyone the way that it is. Why am I doing this when I literally could be doing anything else? Anybody have one of those in their family? So my oldest son, Jaron, when he was a senior in high school, I've shared a little bit of this story before, I think, where we were getting ready to leave for a meeting, and I had an assignment of chores for our kids that they had to do every day. And so we were getting ready to leave, and he was doing homework. And I walked into the room, and I said, hey, Jaron, make sure before you leave for practice, you do your chores, because Mom and I got to go to this meeting. And he was like writing at his desk, and he didn't even look up. And he just said, not going to happen. And I was like, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. Because all of a sudden, this is not about chores anymore. This is about who's going to run this house, right? And he said these words. I'm not kidding. You can ask my wife. This is a true story. He turned around and he said, Dad, I'm sick of it. I'm putting my foot down. Yeah, so I got one of those. Now, while it's a pain in the butt to fight with your kids over chores, Like you've been there, you can kind of sympathize, right? Like, I don't know if you remember in school, remember like getting busy work from a teacher or a substitute in school, and you just hated it with a passion because you knew it didn't matter. You knew they were just trying to control the chaos in the room by keeping everybody busy. Or maybe even now, maybe there's a part of your job right now, there's some task at work that just sort of feels like this, like what's the point? Why are we doing this? Why do we have to do this thing? Because this new boss came in and he said, he's like on this kick about teamwork or on synergy, or we're going to work smarter, not harder. You know how new bosses are, and they're trying to institute a new thing, and now everybody's got to do this dumb thing that everybody knows doesn't matter. Or if you're a parent, is there any more like anything that's more soul-sucking than just the endless carting your kids around when they're like old enough to be involved in a whole bunch of stuff, but they're too young to drive, right? And it's all their commitments. And so you take them and you're just sort of waiting in the car like you're just this really sad taxi driver with a meter running, only there's no meter and there's no payment of any kind. It's just punishment. Right? And sometimes even like volunteer experiences can be like that. For a long time, my two older kids, they were on a swim team, and they would compete in these swim meets. And they, the swim team was like, hey, we're looking for volunteers. And so I got sucked into being the grand marshal. I didn't even know what that meant, other than they put like this reflective vest on me and I looked like I worked for Caltrans. And they gave me this timer and they're like, we need you to time the meets. And I was like, there's a timer right there. You guys already do that. Don't you have an official time? Yeah, we have an official timer, and we have a scoreboard where they time it, but you're sort of the backup to the backup. And so it's just one of the problems. It's one of the things that the Grand Marshal does. And so I stood there with a timer while there were two other timers going, timing the swim. And I was just like, why am I doing this? Nobody cares. See, we all know the frustration of being stuck with a task that feels pointless. But for some of us, those feelings cut a little bit deeper. Because it's not just that the task is pointless when you're in one of those environments. A lot of times it's that the task feels like it's somehow confirming that nagging suspicion or that nagging feeling that your life is starting to feel a little bit pointless. The task isn't just wasting my time. It feels like proof that I'm wasting my life doing this thing. And I know that sounds a bit dramatic, and it is. And it might be a little bit difficult for you to fully relate to. But I can tell you that if this is your question, it also feels incredibly real. So several weeks ago, Hansi and I, my wife and I, were actually talking about our primal questions. And we were trying to explain to each other the obvious truth that answered the other person's question. And she was like, I don't understand why you feel that way. There's this and this and this and this. And I was like, yeah, but your question is this. That's just ridiculous to me. Like, her question is, am I good enough? We talked about that last week. I think I can count on one hand the moments where I've stepped into an environment where I didn't feel good enough. Like, I can't relate to that feeling at all. So I was like trying to explain to her like why she is good enough. And we're talking past each other. Honestly, it was like two crazy people trying to explain why and how they're not crazy to each other. It felt like that. And finally I was just like, see, you don't get it. You don't get it. You don't know why I feel this way. Has that ever happened to you though, where someone has a struggle or an emotional need that you don't have, and it just kind of feels like, okay, well, just get over it. Just stop doing that. Just stop thinking that. I mean, that was literally the model for daytime talk shows, right? It was like, hey, look at these crazy people. They're messed up in ways that you're not, right? And this family's way more dysfunctional than your family. Isn't that entertaining? And now you feel better about your life. That was literally the formula for daytime television. So I understand it if you don't get this. But I can tell you that there's not a day that goes by that I don't wake up longing for my life to count. There's not a day that goes by that I don't wake up where I don't wrestle with, like, am I helping or impacting anybody? Is my life making a difference in the world at all? Does it mean anything to anyone? Which is really the essence of this seventh primal question. Do I have purpose? Does my life actually matter? Like really? Like, I mean, I know everybody has a purpose, like in general. Like, all human beings have worth. I know everybody matters. But like, seriously though, God, like, does my life matter? Do I have purpose? So I think there's some sort of like man card, like bro code requirement that says that you have to watch and love the movie Braveheart. which I do, by the way. Fantastic film. And if you've seen this movie, and you probably have, there's a scene towards the end where William Wallace has been arrested, he's been caught, and the princess is coming in and begging for him to just let it go, to just bow his knee to the king, and so that the king will spare his life. And she's like, if you don't, you'll die. And he says one of the most incredible lines in any movie. He says, every man dies, not every man really lives. And I remember hearing that for the first time, watching it at home, and just like, stopping it, rewind it, watch it again. He's right. He's right. I'm just telling people, like, he's right. So years ago, I read a verse about an Old Testament king who was a descendant of King David. And it's kind of haunted me ever since. It's found in 2 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 20. It says this. It says, Jehoram was 32 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 8 years, and he died to no one's regret. Oh, can you imagine? I mean, he died young, right? He lived to be 40. If you read the story, he died a really terrible death. But he was king for 8 years. Like, this wasn't just a nobody. This is a guy that ruled Israel for 8 years. He was king. He became king at 32. I wasn't a king at 32. I'm not a king at 49. But then he died, and no one regretted his death. So listen, this guy Jehoram, like, he was not a good king. He wasn't even a good guy. But it doesn't tell us that people rejoiced and celebrated when he died. They didn't celebrate. They didn't mourn. They were just indifferent. He died to no one's regret. Oh, no. Seriously? Nobody cared? You lived and died and nobody cared? Oof. So just like with all the other primal questions, there's a variety of ways that this kind of gets imprinted on us. So for me, I inherited this from my dad. He hasn't taken this assessment, but I'm super close with him, and looking at his life and knowing him the way that I do, there's no doubt in my mind that this is his question, because he spent his life trying to leave a mark. He spent his life trying to build something that's going to outlive him. He spent his life trying to prove that his life matters. And so he passed that on to me. It's one of the things I inherited from him. Maybe for you, if this is your question, it was more of the overall environment of the family you grew up in. It was very inspirational and motivational. And it was obvious that you were made for greatness. And it was clear that average was the enemy. Maybe there were unspoken pressures to do something big with your life. The problem was that big was always just sort of this fuzzy thing that was out there. It was very undefined. If you grew up in church environments like I did, the pressure can be even greater. Because not only does your family need and want you to do something big with your life, God needs and wants you to do something big with your life. And that was a huge part of the situation for me, how that got imprinted on my life. For the last 15 years, I've kept an image of my phone that says this. It says, be faith-filled, big thinking, bet the farm risk taker. Never insult God with small thinking or safe living. And I look at that image at least once a week. Because I'm like, yes, I don't want to insult God with a small life. I don't want to waste my life. I don't want to die and nobody regret it. I want to be a faith-filled, big thinking, bet the farm risk taker and do something for God with my life. And it all started for me when I came to faith in junior high school. It was at a large church in Sacramento. We had this huge, amazing youth ministry. It had a profound impact on thousands and thousands of students in the Sacramento area. 37 years later, my youth pastor, the youth pastor that was for both Hansi and I, is still one of my closest friends. But in that youth ministry, we had one goal, we had one lens, one focus, and that was to change the world. You imagine trying to motivate a group of junior high schoolers. You're going to change the world. First, you got to learn how to tie your shoes. Growing up, I didn't even know verses like 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 11 and 12 were in the Bible. It says this, it says, make it your goal to live a quiet life, minding your own business and working with your hands. Then people who are not believers will respect the way that you live. Even when I read that, I'm like, and that sounds like people with small thinking and safe living. That sounds like something those people would say. Only it wasn't. The guy who said this was a guy named Paul, and he couldn't have lived a bigger, more significant, more faith-filled life. In my story, shortly after God grabbed a hold of my heart, he also grabbed a hold of my future. And I knew that he was calling me to spend my life for him in ministry. But honestly, that's just my story. See, you don't have to be called into ministry. You don't even have to be a Jesus follower for your life to be aimed in the direction of trying to having an impact and making your life count for, do I have purpose, to be the question that's driving your life. If this is your question, maybe like me, you wish that you weren't hounded by fears of chronic underachievement and insignificance. But also your default is to feel an inescapable pressure to change the world. You wish that you could care about something without working like crazy to try to make it bigger and better, but also you can't help but believe that if it doesn't make a massive difference, then it just doesn't matter. It was a waste of time. You wish you could regularly find meaning in everyday moments, but your impulse is to see small tasks as a waste of your time. I mean, you can't help but feel like, yeah, I know those things need to get done, just not by me, because I've got one life and I ain't wasting it doing chores. I don't ever say those things in front of my kids. You wish you could be present in and enjoy more of your own life, but also you live with a constant dissatisfaction and disappointment because you haven't lived up to the life that you thought you were going to live. Or maybe it's just me. I've had so many moments where I thought, man, I thought I'd be better than this. I thought I would have done more than this. I thought I would have accomplished more. I thought I would have amounted to more. I thought I would have, I don't know what I thought, but I thought I would have mattered more than I do. I expected more from myself. I expected more from my life. Looking back over my own life, what I've noticed is that the fear of a small life is actually a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because you keep waiting around for the big opportunity and the big assignment and the big moment to reveal itself, but it just never does. And as you're waiting, your life is passing you by. Not only are you not living the life that you're dreaming of, you're barely living the life you have. Instead of, quote unquote, wasting time on the everyday nuts and bolts of life because they feel somehow too small, you actually waste lots of time escaping from your life just to cope with the averageness of it. And the tragedy is, just like with all the other questions, just like with all the other primal questions, the question itself blinds you to the truth, right? Like for instance, one of the questions is, am I loved? People who are constantly living their life asking, am I loved? They cannot see all the ways that they are loved. They cannot see all of the people who love them. When your question is, do I have purpose? You're blind to the purpose that's right in front of you. You can't see the real life impact and significance of your own life to the people that you're married to, or that you're parenting, or that who raised you, or in your job, or what you're doing with your life, to your neighbors. Like all the others, your question isn't just your kryptonite. It points to your superpower, to what God wants to bring out through you to the world. Because if this is your question, one of the ways you can know if one of these people is around you or in your life is that these are the people who just sort of naturally push to try to inspire people to be more. When this is your question, when you look at the world, it doesn't get you down because you don't just see what is. You see what could be and should be. You challenge and encourage people to think bigger and risk greater and sacrifice more and leave their comfort zone and to get up when all they want to do is give up. Who are the people that are in your life that are calling you to a bigger life than you're currently living? Who are the people who are calling you to a better version of yourself than you currently are? Who are the people in your life whose primal question is, do I have purpose? Part of the truth of this series is that these primal questions, they aren't new. These are the core issues human beings have been wrestling with from the moment that we severed our relationship with God. So there's an Old Testament prophet that I think had a little bit of this question in him. His name was Jeremiah. And you can kind of understand why, really, right from the beginning of where his story picks up. So in Jeremiah chapter 1, beginning with verse 4, it says this. It says, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. So just a quick little backstory on Jeremiah. He was born into a deeply spiritual and religious family. His dad was the priest in Israel, which meant he not only grew up around church or around the temple, but he had also worked and served there his whole life. It also meant that someday when his dad was gone, Jeremiah was going to be the next priest in Israel. Have you ever had that moment where you just had your life all mapped out? You knew exactly how it was going to go. You could picture where you were headed. You knew what you were going to do. You knew exactly how the story was going to move. But then it turned out God had other plans. See, I'm absolutely convinced that if you will let him, God will write a story through your life that is bigger and bolder and more beautiful than you can possibly imagine. But it also means that you will have to give up control and let go of the story as you were imagining it, as you were writing it. In fact, in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, it says that God is able to do immeasurably more than all we could ask or even imagine. Can you imagine? I can imagine a lot. I can imagine a lot for my life, but God can do immeasurably more than I could ask or imagine, according not to my abilities, not to how great I am, according to his power at work within us. So for Jeremiah, God shows up and says, Jeremiah, you're not going to be the priest because I've chosen you as a prophet. And this is kind of the interesting thing that we don't see happening here, because priests and prophets had completely different roles. See, priests represented the people to God, but prophets represented God to the people. Priests spoke to God for people. Prophets spoke for God to the people. Priests were there to kind of settle everybody down. Prophets were there to stir everybody up and unsettle them. Priests led, prophets confronted. Being a priest was something that you were born into, which is pretty cool. But prophets were handpicked by God. And think about that in the light of this primal question. Being handpicked by God for anything, much less to be his prophet. That is the ultimate, you were born for big things, you're going to change the world kind of moment right there. When God says, I choose you. And so Jeremiah is blown away and overwhelmed, and I'm sure he did what we do. He starts imagining and predicting how that's all going to go. He starts writing the story in his mind, and suddenly his expectations are like, man, my life is going to be even bigger and more significant than I thought. And why wouldn't he think that? God just chose him to be the prophet. But then none of it turns out anything like what he imagined. Not only does nobody listen to him, they hate him. They hate his message. He's not popular. He's not settling. He realizes that whole stirring everybody up thing, I'd much rather be settling them down. And so they attack him and they try to kill him. And Jeremiah is devastated. He's disillusioned and he's mad at God. And so he says this in Jeremiah 20, verse 7. He says, "Oh Lord," which is a funny way to start a conversation with God when you're about to say, at least he's reverent. "Oh Lord, dear God, you misled me, and I allowed myself to be misled by you. Of course I'm stuck doing this. You're stronger than I am, and you overpowered me. And now I'm mocked every single day of my life, and everyone laughs at me. You tricked me, God. I thought I was going to change the world. I haven't changed anything. I thought that you gave me a purpose, but it turns out my life is pointless. You are ruining and wasting my life. I could have been the priest. Not to mention, I didn't even want to do it. You forced me to do this. Give me a break." Isn't it amazing how quickly we move from just blessing God and having a great attitude to blaming him when things don't go the way we want, when the story turns out it's we're just worshiping. No, now we're whining. God, please give me this. Just help me get this car. God, why did you give me this car? I can't afford the payment. God, please give me this job. I need this. It's going to be the perfect job. I flipping hate this job that you gave me. So I haven't been through anything like what Jeremiah experienced, but I have had a lot of moments where I've been like, God, this is not what I signed up for. You tricked me. Like, I've felt like that before, definitely. I thought my life was going to matter. Like, nobody even listens. Nobody cares. See, it's easy to assume that when we give our lives to God, he's going to give us an easier life in return. But I've got really bad news for you. God isn't trying to make your life easier. He's trying to make it more meaningful. He makes them better for sure. Deeper, richer, fuller, far more fulfilling. Almost never easier though. Almost never. When you watch a movie or you read a book, the most powerful, moving, impactful, significant stories have one thing in common. They're filled with struggle and suffering. And the more significant the characters and the more meaningful their story, the greater their struggle. And yet somehow it doesn't connect in our heads that the same thing is true of life. That what makes a meaningful story is also the only thing that's going to make a meaningful life. So yeah, God's not trying to make your life easier. He's trying to make you tougher. So for Jeremiah, it all comes to a head a few verses later in that same chapter, Jeremiah 20, verse 14. Jeremiah is going back and forth with God, and then he finally just says this: I curse the day I was born. May no one celebrate the day of my birth. I've been in some low moments. I still want people to celebrate my birthday. I'm just going to be honest. But think about Jeremiah for a second, right? It's tragic for anyone to get to this point. He's not being dramatic. He's 100% serious. I curse the day I was born. But think about how all this started for Jeremiah back in chapter 1. Because it started with God going, I knew you before you were born. I made you before you were formed. And I chose you before you even came out of your mother's womb. And just like how powerful and beautiful that conversation is. And now here's Jeremiah going, well, yeah, I don't like the way you made me. And I really don't like what you chose for me. You know what? I curse the day that I was born. Whew. Wow. See, I think part of the truth of Jeremiah's story is something that I've learned in my own life. See, if your purpose is attached to an outcome, it'll be really, really shallow. If your significance is tied to success, it's going to be really fragile. But if they're both rooted in who you're becoming, in the life that you're living, in the person you are, they will become unshakable. Because the outcomes for most of us in most areas of our life are completely out of our hands. So much of the success is circumstantial and out of your control. But when your purpose is rooted in the person that you're becoming, no matter what the circumstances are, it cannot be shaken. No matter how things change, whether it's success or failure, whether it's ups or downs, you never lose your purpose, you never lose your significance because they were never attached to those things. They were never about those things. They're about the kind of man or the kind of woman you're becoming. They're about the leader that you are. They're the kind of husband and wife and father and mother and friend that you're becoming. They're the kind of human being you are, which is really what God says over and over and over again. Every time Jeremiah is struggling, he says your purpose, he's basically like your purpose is found in being who I created you to be. I didn't promise you that you were going to go out and change the world. I just chose you because I think you're the person I need to go do this thing. And there's significance and purpose and power in that. Regardless of the outcomes, that's not up to you. And that is what God is saying to you and me. That your purpose is found in you being who he created you to be. See, I think we often allow how ordinary our lives feel to just sort of lull us to sleep. And we miss what God is trying to do in us and through us. One of the most profound realities is that because purpose and meaning are rooted in who you are, you can bring them into whatever situation you step into. Whatever it is your hand finds to do, you can bring significance and purpose to that, because it's not about the success. It's about who you are, who God created you to be, which is the exact opposite of what our culture says. So I've spent most of my life feeling like a sidekick stuck in a hero's world. You know what I'm talking about? You guys remember the Incredibles movie? You remember the little kid Buddy who like gets in his car and he's like, "Who are you?" He's like, "I'm Buddy. I'm Incrediboy. I'm going to be your sidekick." Anybody remember that? Anybody? Like I feel like I'm Incrediboy. And so I superimposed my face on Incrediboy. Take a look. Look at it. There I am. That's me. That's how I felt most of my life. I'm Incrediboy. Like, but that's the thing. Like, heroes do all the cool stuff. They know what to do, number one. They have all the answers. They get the cool costumes. Not like that one. Right? If the sidekicks are around at all, they're sort of just bumbling around in the background, just trying to stay out of the way while the hero does all the heavy lifting and saves the day. On their best day, they're sort of just a helper. And most of the time, their purpose in the story is to accentuate how awesome the hero is, because it stands in stark contrast with how ordinary they are. But I'm here to tell you, that's just in the comic books. Because as it turns out, in real life, a hero is just a sidekick who decided to pour themselves out in their ordinary life in an extraordinary way. They're just somebody who recognized their significance isn't found in trying to be the hero, but in being who God created them to be. See, I think at some level, everybody dreams about doing something big, but more often than not, God asks us to do what we think of as little things as if they were big. Jesus said something really profound in Matthew 16:25. I think about it all the time. He said this. He said, "For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for me, they will find it." It's mind-blowing to me that what Jesus is saying here is that the one thing that can steal your life from you is this life. Is you trying to save this life, you trying to make something out of this life. But when we stop clutching to our lives and we give it over to Him, we find a life we could have never dreamed of or imagined. And as somebody who's spent my whole life on this question, do I have purpose? Does my life count? Does my life matter? I can tell you those things work the same way. When you search for and grasp and cling to and try to have purpose and meaning in your life, you will lose them. They will always be beyond your reach. They will always slip through your fingers. But when you bring all of that to Jesus and you give it all over to Him, you will find purpose like you could not believe. You will find meaning that you could not imagine. And so I want to challenge you, whether this is your question or not. Every moment that you struggle, whenever you're tempted to just sort of hold back and wait for the big thing, to remind yourself of the significance of just doing the next right thing. Because the truth is, you're not depending on that moment to give those things to you at all. You're bringing purpose and meaning and significance with you to that moment, to that thing, whatever that next right thing is to do. It didn't get very good reviews, but because of the way I'm wired, because of this stuff, I loved the movie Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium. And when he is getting ready to die at the end and he's having a conversation with the girl who's taking over his Wonder Emporium, he says, "Your life is an occasion, rise to it." I can barely say those words without getting choked up. Your life is an occasion, rise to it. You can bring purpose and meaning to being a mom, to being a dad, to whatever job you have, in whatever place you live, whoever your neighbors are, whatever situation you're in. Your life is an occasion. Rise to it. Live into who God created you to be. Remind yourself that the biggest thing you can do is show up to the small, everyday moments of your life and actually live them. And the same is true in your faith. We often have this picture of what faith looks like, that it's always flashy and dramatic and miraculous. And sometimes it is. I've had a handful of those moments in 40 years of following Jesus, and they're pretty amazing. They are. But along the way, I've also learned that big moments of faith almost always walk hand in hand with small moments of faithfulness. In fact, most of the time, the way that our faith is expressed and carried out every day, day in and day out, is through faithfulness. It's looking and going, God, I'm having a hard time seeing how any of this matters. But God, I'm going to show up to this moment, and I'm going to bring the best of me to this moment because I trust in you, and I trust in the story that you're writing in my life. Have that kind of faith. So the last chunk of Jeremiah's life, he starts writing these letters. And it's in one of these letters that he writes some of the most beautiful, hope-filled words in all the scriptures. You probably have heard this one verse. I think it's probably the second most known quoted verse in the whole Bible behind John 3:16. It's Jeremiah 29, verse 11. He says, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope." Can you imagine being Jeremiah and writing those words? Because they're not just words, they're not just God's words to God's people. They're God's words to Jeremiah. Can you imagine with how disillusioned he had been, cursing the day he was born? And he's writing these words, and as he's writing, he's going, God, you see me? You have a plan for a future and a hope for, my life isn't pointless. Although those words, they weren't written or spoken for us, they do reveal God's heart and his intention towards you. That he has plans to give you a future. They're good plans to give you hope. I love what God says in the two verses right after. They hardly ever get included or quoted. In verse 12, it says, this is still God talking. "In those days when you pray, I will listen. If you look for me wholeheartedly, with your whole heart, you'll find me. I will be found by you, says the Lord." There is nothing more significant in your life than the moment that God becomes real to you, than the moment that you step into a relationship with Jesus and his love and his grace and his goodness and his reality comes rushing across the threshold of your life. It changes everything. Your life is an occasion. Rise to it. In just a moment, we're going to pray. And I wanted to end here with these verses, because what a beautiful way to end, that when we pray, not when I pray, when you pray, when you talk to God in a second while I'm talking to God, he's going to listen to you. Maybe you're here and you're going, I'm searching for God, or I've been asking questions, and I don't know if this is all real. I'm telling you, he's going, you search for me with your heart, you will be found by me, because I know exactly who you are, because I knew you before you were even born. Let's pray together.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that he's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because a Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances, and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you, and thank you for watching our online service today.